Okay, so now we're going to talk about the present perfect. In English, we form, oh, let me just mute that. In English, we form the present perfect tense by combining have or has with the past participle of a verb. He has seen, have you tried, they have eaten. Now, it depends on what order you're looking at all this, but of course the participles as adjectives was also reviewing the participles. So I will probably use that same thing to do it, but here we go. All right, so next, to form the past participle, and again, this should be a review for you, you take an AR verb, you remove the AR ending, and you add auto to the stem. So like hablar would become hablado. Or you take an ER or IR verb, remove the ending, and add ido to the stem, like comido or vivido. And that's like saying hablado is spoken, comido is eaten, and vivido is lived. So those are the past participles that go with the present perfect. Now, you can't just use the participle to say the present perfect. You also have to use the verb haber. And of course, you're using the present tense form of the verb haber, because if you were using the past tense form, the imperfect form, then you would be talking about the pluscuamperfecto or the pluperfect, which I lovingly call the past perfect. All right, so let's look at the verb haber. All right, so here's some examples of the present perfect. And in the slide that I just skipped over said that we use the present perfect in Spanish just like we use it in English. So just like in English, how we would say, I have rented a new apartment. In Spanish, I would say, he alquilado un nuevo apartamento, which it's about to show you. So same exact translation there. There's nothing weird going on. But this is, I don't know, I can't remember if there's a chart that shows you. Here are the verb haber in its present tense. So has, a, hemos, nobody cares Greek, and han. Okay? So what does the Spanish version of this look like? To choose is escoger. So he escogido, has escogido, ha escogido, hemos escogido, and han escogido. I have decided, he decidido. I think you get the gist there, right? Some good words for you to think of when you're doing the present perfect are todavía and ya. Here's todavía in use. No he reparado la bicicleta todavía. That means I haven't repaired the bicycle yet. Todavía means still or yet, depending on how you're using it. So here's a question for you. ¿Qué trabajos has tenido? And that means, what jobs have you had? When the past participle is used with forms of haber, the final O never changes. It stays in its masculine and singular form. Again, depending on which one of these videos you've watched first. Participles as adjectives are adjectives, like it sounds. And adjectives must match their nouns in gender and number. But when I'm using those participles with the verb haber, forming the present perfect tense, those participles are now acting as verb helpers, and verb helpers never change tense. Just like any verb doesn't change, not tense, I'm sorry, they don't change gender and number. Just like verbs don't change gender. If it's, I can say yo he vivido, and some boy down the street can say yo he vivido. It doesn't matter. It's gender neutral. And the verb itself, haber, is going to tell you who's doing it. So you don't need to add an O or you don't need to add an S to the end of that as well. So Ricardo ha grabado su película favorita. No matter who's doing it, no matter how many people are doing it, always ends in an O. Again, it's not acting like an adjective when it's used with the verb haber. Okay? Sus hermanos han grabado una telenovela. The present perfect is fantastic because you don't have to know anything other than your subject and you're good to go. You can already change your your verb into its participle form and you know it's going to be masculine and singular. Whereas with the adjectives, you have to change it. Then you have to figure out what it's describing, feminine, plural, all that stuff. So present perfect tense is fantastic. Use the verb haber and then use the masculine singular form of the participle. Certain verbs that have a double vowel in the infinitive require an accent on the I in the past participle. And it's best just to say double vowel ER verbs. That's the better way to say that. For example, caer, leer, oír, creer, traer, and reír become, there you go, caído, leído, oído, creído, traído, and reído. If I didn't do that, it'd be caído, leído, oído, and I need that ir, oído, creído, so I need that accent. Notice that we have, we place no and any other negative words, object pronouns, and reflexive pronouns. Any pronouns at all and any negative words are going to come before the verb, and the verb is haber. The participle, the ado and ido and muerto and roto and hecho and all that stuff, that is a verb helper, and it's going to stay with the verb haber always, but it's not a verb. The verb is haber. So any of this stuff that's listed on this page, any negative words and any pronouns are going to come directly before the verb, which would be right there. ¿Has alquilado esa película alguna vez? No, no la he alquilado nunca. And actually nunca should really go right there. But here's my point. Have you rented that movie before? No, I've never rented it. The it that stands for the película is going to come before the conjugated verb. Okay? And I mentioned this in some of my classes. The verb haber and the participle that go with it need to be treated like salt and pepper at a dinner table. The correct etiquette is that you never split up salt and pepper. If somebody says, can you pass the salt? Then you pass the salt and pepper, because the salt and pepper are married. So take that little tidbit with you the next time you go on your fancy date to Burger King. But my point is, keep haber and its participle always together. Nothing will ever come between them. Okay? Some verbs have irregular past participles. And of course, we've got cramped, VVRFH. And here are all of them. Those are the verbs that they go with and their participles. Now, what I did was, cramped is for, the C in cramped is for cubierto, or the verb cubrir. So I went through this, and again, it depends on which video you've watched. I went through this, and I did it the right way, but then I also went back and highlighted and added the prefixes, because don't forget, descubrir is just the verb cubrir with the prefix des. So I would take the participle, which is cubierto, and add the same des, and then I've done the right thing there. Hopefully you can see the pattern though. So poner becomes puesto, exponer becomes expuesto. Describir, descrito, instead of escribir, escrito. Oops, okay, practice. I have eaten the potatoes. So in this case, I'm going to say the yo form of haber, which is e, and then I take to eat, which is comer, and I change it into a participle. So he comido, and then las papas. Super easy. He has painted the portrait, so it's he. Now, I'm going to use a, right? But when I'm talking in the a or an form of the verb haber, that could be talking about él or ella or usted, or with the conjugation of an, I could be talking about ellos or ellas or ustedes. So to be more specific, I need to mention the subject there. So I would write él, and then a is the conjugation for haber, and then paint is pintar, and then to change that into a participle would be pintado. So él ha pintado el retrato. We have watched the paintbrushes. So, and let me just go back here real quick. This was e and not yo e, because e is only the yo form, so I don't need to be more specific there. You can absolutely do that if you want to, but you don't need to, and it's a little bit redundant. It kind of places emphasis on the subject if you mention it, and it doesn't need to be mentioned. So again, here we have washed. The nosotros form is the only form for we. So I don't need to say nosotros. I just need to say hemos. And then to wash is lavar. So hemos lavado los pinceles. And pincel is a paintbrush. So have you done your homework? So to do your homework would be hacer la tarea. And have you, most likely that's a teacher talking to a student or a friend talking to a friend. And in that case, it's going to be the to form. So again, the to form, I don't need to specify you because has only goes for to. And so has and then hacer is one of the irregulars. It's hecho. And so has hecho and then tu tarea. Somebody asked me the other day why this didn't have an accent on it. To with an accent is the pronoun you, and to, sorry about that, to is actually the, tu tarea is the possessive adjective as in your homework. So if I want to say your, I spell it like this. If I want to say you, as in, hey, you come here, then it would be to with an accent. My friends have arrived. So mis amigos, that's plural, doesn't include yo. So it's not hemos, it's an. So again, with an, I need to mention my subject. So I'm going to start with mis amigos, and then an for the conjugation of haber, and then llegar is to arrive, so llegado. Mis amigos han llegado. And the last one, the class has finished the project, la clase. And then how many classes is it? One or more than one? I did this one on purpose because y'all get a little confused sometimes. So it's la clase ha terminado el proyecto instead of la clase han. Even though there's lots of kids in the class, I didn't say the kids in the class. I said the class, and it's one class. So that's that one. Now let's jet over to the pluperfect real quick. Okay, so I'm going to have to jet through this part because I'm almost out of time. But the pluperfect is almost the exact same thing as the present perfect. It's just instead of saying have done something, it's had done something. So it's using the past tense to discuss something that's been done, which is why I like to call it the past perfect. But I keep telling y'all it's actually called the pluscuamperfecto or the pluperfect. So instead of saying I have studied, you're saying I had studied. So this is the verb chart. It's the imperfect form of the verb haber. Había, habías, había, habíamos, habían. Now, of course, había and había and the yo form and the la and usted form could be a problem. So in this case, I do need to specify the yo form with a yo because it could be la and usted as well. With the verb haber, it's okay, but with había, you have to specify. So I'm going to actually change these sentences into the pluperfect, which would be instead of I have eaten the potatoes, instead of I have eaten the potatoes, I had eaten the potatoes. Instead of he has painted the portrait, he had painted the portrait. We had washed the paintbrushes. Instead of have you done your homework, had you done your homework. My friends have arrived, my friends had arrived. You get the picture. So now I just have to change, instead of the verb haber in the present tense, has, hemos, han, I'm going to change it to the imperfect. So había, habías, había, habíamos, habían. So yo había comido las papas instead of yo he comido las papas. And instead of él ha pintado el retrato, él había pintado el retrato. Nothing else in the sentence changes. It's just this verb right here changes from to había, and this changes from a to había. Now again, I did have to add a yo here because see how that's the same in both subjects? Next one, I don't have to have a subject. Habíamos lavado los pinceles instead of hemos lavado. And then, had you done your homework? Habías terminado tu tarea. Or excuse me, you know what? Earlier I put hecho and it should have been hecho instead of terminado. My friends had arrived. Mis amigos habían llegado. And the class had finished its project. La clase había terminado el proyecto. So that's the pluperfect, along with the present perfect and practices and everything. So now you should be able to do this section.